All
Hi,
right, Greta, how's it going?
it's good. How are you?
Beautiful, beautiful. I am very well, very well. Here in Michigan, it's a little gloomy today, so it's kind of a nice day to be, tucked away inside, maybe watch some movies, and yeah, the day has, very much that environment of just not doing very much.
Yeah, yeah, taking full advantage of the weekend.
Sure, sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, first and foremost, for taking the time today. I am absolutely psyched digging into your story in general, but then also most recently with Soft and Quiet. That movie was absolutely so unnerving and just so many different things. I'm really, really psyched to dig into that too. Your film story and even prior to actually being involved, tell us about just your relationship early on and what were some things film wise or maybe actors or even further on in directors that were interesting you.
Yeah. It's always an interesting question because I feel like it constantly evolved. Um, and it's like my answer to that question constantly changes, I feel like.
Sure.
Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think in the beginning, it was like movies in general were just something that was very, very fascinating to me. And I always got really involved in movies. Like I would watch a movie and then it would just stick with me for a week, or just like, and like after the first viewing, I just feel like lost in that world. That's
Okay.
when I kind of knew like if I really, really liked a movie, whether I was conscious of what it was, if it affected me and it lasted with me and I felt like I was the character for an hour or whatever was happening, just like completely took over. That happens a lot. That, or at least that was like my first sort of introduction and falling in love with film because it was just this immersive thing that either you completely related to a character or the world that was created. It gave you an escape or it gave you courage or it gave you something that I don't know. That's what I think really was it. Like it's just complete fascination with you can immerse yourself into a book and there was that too and but it's just like it's a little bit stronger, it's a little bit more heightened and um so in the beginning I would say it wasn't a filmmaker. It wasn't like I want to do this. I want to, this director, like I want to direct. Like it wasn't anything like that. It was just this fascination. And then, and I had friends growing up. We did play groups and stuff like that. We had like a group that we put together just on our own, had nothing to do with school. It was just something we wanted to do. And somewhere in the middle of that, and I was like 9, 10 years old, we started filming them. And then that sort of evolved into, oh, why don't we like shoot short films? Let's write them. My sister would always write them. I would film them. We would both edit them. It was just sort of like an experiment and evolving and seeing what that was like and if we wanted to make anything and then that evolved into wanting to pursue it as a real thing and go to school for it and continue on.
Now, within these earlier, these earlier movies that you guys were making, was it, like pretty like serious takes on things, or did you have, where it was kind of a blend of like, having, it just being silly and maybe even seeing some years back and you're like, boy, what was I doing? What was this going on here?
Yeah, you know, I really hope I can find this film because there's something about it that it will probably still like through my entire career it'll still be like one of the best things that that I've ever made. And this was right around the time of first discovering a video camera and making something.
Okay.
And I think this I made with I have two sisters and all three of us are in it. Um, but I think it was really playful. It was like there were definitely film influences on it. And if I watched it again, I could probably dissect like, oh, I know where that came from and that came. So it was more, we didn't take it so seriously. We were like having fun with it, and it's kind of brilliant. Like
Okay.
it's really smart actually. And I watch it. I think the last time I saw it was quite a while ago, but I was like, man, like that was actually really smart. Like, how did we even come up with that stuff? And I think as we got older, we did start to take it a little too seriously.
Yeah.
and and there was like a fascination with horror. Like there was a good chunk of my teenage years with my sister. We would every Friday we would have a big horror fest.
Oh
And
man.
we'd watch at least 2 or 3 films and stay up till like 3 in the morning. And we'd always try to make it sort of 3 different types. So either it would be like 70s horror or Japanese horror, or we were just always just trying to find like 3 different kind of subgenres of it. And But yeah, I don't know, like yeah, I think we just later on we just sort of got a little too like, well, how can we be like, I think we that was like the first stuff, it was innocent and it was just like, yeah, this is what we don't want to do. And then later on it was like, how can we be really smart about it? And those films are like, they're pretty bad. uh, they're trying very, very hard to
Okay.
be serious and smart and weird in all the bad, like wrong ways of not knowing what you're doing. Um, so that
Oh my
was,
god.
so none of those films or anything, that I would say they were just exploring this idea of like, yeah, these are just the first steps of being interested in pursuing this and wanting to tell stories this way. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
And it's funny too, you kind of mentioned like I had never pursued anything like film wise, but my friends and I were very much like that as far as like discovering a video camera and thinking of how to come up with effects. And my one buddy was very into like Tom Savini and just different ways of like kills or pulling off like a cut and like the gore of it. And even there was like one thing that we had that was very silly, and it was like Attack of a Killer Banana. But it was forced perspective. So we had the banana really close to the camera, so it looked like it was huge. And we watched back and we're like, damn, that actually like looks kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Like, you would never think anything, much of it, but just kind of the innocence behind, just having a good time and having fun with it. Now,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
did you have like a friend group too? You mentioned like the other two sisters. Was there a group of friends from school too that kind of would patch in with these?
Not the film so much. We did. There was one that we got roped our friends into, and that one was maybe not because of them, but maybe the worst of them all. Uh, but no, yeah, they participated in some of them for sure.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love that. Now, as far as like, within your upbringing too, was theater or like a local video rental, was that something that was close and near and dear to you guys? I know you mentioned with like, getting the horror movies and different things like that. Did you have more of a close relationship to either or?
Yeah. I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, so Pittsburgh was the place to
Yeah.
go.
Oh yeah.
There are some, other theaters in areas nearby, but they were all sort of AMC theaters, all sort of like but there were art house theaters in Pittsburgh that they're still there. I mean, they don't quite have the same. They don't quite get the same films like they used to.
Mm.
But they were amazing. I saw so many films that opened my mind to just cinema that I don't think I would have had the access that in some video rental stores. One in Pittsburgh, which I cannot remember the name, and then there was another one in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is outside of Pittsburgh. And those two video rental places, again, you could get films from everywhere, and
Hmm.
movies that I never ever would have heard of. Like it, yeah. So that was a big contributor to having that. And like the independent film in Pittsburgh is actually pretty big. Like there's it's a pretty impressive for a city that you wouldn't necessarily like think of, and especially then like and think of it as like an art house movie
Hmm.
spot.
Sure.
But there were quite a few theaters, so you could see a lot of independent cinema,
Okay.
weird movies, you know.
What, where did you find, like, can you remember maybe even earlier titles of like discovering independent cinema as opposed to, like going to a shop and seeing Jurassic Park or, Terminator and then seeing something, like maybe even like a movie cover and you're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. Um, Trying to think of
It's kind of hard because
I
I'm trying
mean,
to think of even my
yeah,
personally.
yeah, I mean, this isn't like uh, I'm trying to like saw I remember seeing Run Lola Run in the theater in Pittsburgh, which was, it was a tiny movie. I don't know that I would have ever discovered that any other way. Like, um, Lars von Trier, Harmony Korine, um,
Oh man.
those are some, I saw Mr. Lonely in the tiny little art house theater in Pittsburgh. Um,
What a
trying
weird
to think
movie
of,
too.
yeah, yeah,
There's like people like Harmony Korine that exists, and it's like, how did this pass like drafts of people to get made? But it's a beautiful thing. I absolutely love that that exists. Just some of the earlier things, even like I was mentioning earlier, Julian Donkey Boy. I don't know if
hmm
you'd ever seen that or are familiar, but it's just like, what in the hell is this? Very wild. I
yeah.
love that. Now, within as far as you had mentioned, doing different things with friends and making movies and kind of going, further from that, but in an appreciation for film, just in general, from I want to kind of jump into like a cinematographer or from
hmm
your approach working in film. And a couple of different, aspects of film or subgenres, and just talk about maybe a particular scene that really sticks with you. And to start, maybe even talking in the action subgenre of film. What's a scene or a moment in film that just was very captivating to you that just is forever ingrained in your brain?
Yeah. Hmm.
Hmm.
This is again kind of going back and rewatching films that I think I started to appreciate. There's a lot of action film. Hmm. Um,
So I was trying to break it up into just
yeah.
moments as far as like things that may have been memorable to you and maybe how they pulled it off or just how it was shot and possibly but within action, comedy, drama, and horror. I was trying to look into maybe these and see if there were particular moments that stick out to you or are memorable to you.
Yeah. Um, I know that there's a lot of them.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to think of specific ones. I think, you know, it, hmm. I mean, I will say, kind of going back and rewatching some Spielberg films and realizing I've always sort of been impressed. Like I love subtle, like I love subtlety in the way that this the visual storytelling is so effective that you don't realize that what just unfolded in front of you. And I think he's such a master at that, where he's known for these like in reality like really really elaborate one take scenes that you don't think of them as that. You don't think like you know I always found his films as as a kid, like any of them just sort of um they affected me, but I never I never really appreciated the filmmaking part of it. I always kind of saw them as a little bit more mainstream, and
Hmm.
I sort of immediately sort of went into this, like, as I got older, into art house and appreciating movies that were just really outside the box and
Hmm.
forcing you to think a lot and be patient and heady, and um, but then you sort of like rediscovering films and rediscovering and appreciating craft. He's somebody that I go back to, and I'm like, it's so incredible. It's like masterclass of getting the story across visually in a way that doesn't call attention to itself, achieves the goal, and
Hmm.
it's incredibly impressive. Um, but they're not like, like, oh yeah, I remember that scene that was just like 5 minutes, and it was all these crazy things happened, and it's like I'd have to go back and find them and be like, oh yeah, that was one that, there's one in Jaws that's incredibly simple, but it's so thought out and effective, and and yeah, I don't know. I love that. I love really smart visual choices to tell a story.
Yeah, and even with his stuff, I feel like it's almost like discrediting at times that he's as big as he is, or he is the name that he is. Like, it almost kind of makes me think sometimes of like Stephen King. When he like comes out with pseudo names to kind of just let people think of the story rather than who it is that's coming up with it first. Like, if he's ever thought about doing something like that, because I think his stuff is just always so like above and beyond, to where people are like, oh, okay, this is going to be huge and this is going to be crazy, and it's like, well, you might not know some of the tricks that he's pulling off to not have to use CGI or not have to
Yeah.
use elaborate like post editing or anything like that. And yeah, I mean, his stuff is at least absolutely always so crazy within that too. You were mentioning horror, and
Hmm.
kind of touching on those interests and different things. Anything ever come about as far as a rational or irrational fear that you just never thought of until you watched this stupid movie, and then ever since you're like, oh, now I can't get away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I'm glad that you mentioned Stephen King, because I was thinking about, and that actually sparked Thinner. Thinner
Yeah.
really, really freaked me out. That was definitely one. Uh, Completely irrational fear from that.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say a weird one was The Ring. That one really freaked me
Oh
out.
man.
Oh, and Candyman. That one also. All three
I
of those,
love that.
just like completely irrational, non-realistic uh, story lines of of what could happen to you, but all of those things were just so eerie, and I don't know, yeah, they got to me.
I love it. I love it. I don't hear a whole lot of people mention Thinner either, and that is one where it's just like it's something kind of with that witchcraft element of just somebody simply just touching you, and it's like, oh God, what did they just do to me?
Yeah, and he's such a horrible, like, you empathize, but then he just he doesn't learn from it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that movie is just so freaky. I
Yeah.
haven't watched it in a little while, but it definitely like stuck with me for a while.
Have you seen the house that Jack built?
Mm-mm.
This is, I think, Lars von Trier's like latest movie.
Okay, no, I haven't
Oh,
seen it yet.
oh man, that just for whatever reason you kind of mentioned, the guy being crappy, and for whatever reason you're still empathizing with him. That movie like pushed that element of you're just wanting the worst to happen to this person, and then by the end of it, you're like, oh God, I kind of feel like really bad. Like I want to help him all of a sudden. It,
Hmm.
it was rough. His stuff is always kind of a push in the direction of like, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah, yeah, no,
No,
yeah.
so you mentioned within schooling, and did you have anything pre-college or anything to where you were taking on to kind of prep yourself for wanting to go into schooling post, or was this something where after graduating you ended up discovering and looking into schools and all that?
After graduating high school, or
Right.
um, yeah, I did a pre-college course in Pittsburgh. That was sort of, I think, just I can do this, and this will help me get into maybe a school that I want to get into. And the the curriculum itself, it was pretty simple, and it was really self motivated. It was like shoot a film on Super 8 and then take some stills, and it wasn't and it wasn't that very long. I think it was like a couple of months. But but then I did like a NIFA thing in Princeton, and that was just a big confirmation that I wanted to do this. I think doing that program, which was very similar to film school, in its sort of intensity and hands-on and collaborative elements, I was like immediately hooked. Like it was overwhelming, it was scary, it was all these things, but when it was over, I was like, I can't, like I have to do like this is it. Like I gotta get that again. So it just confirmed that what the direction that I was going in, or what I wanted to do, was the right thing.
Mm.
And New York was the goal. I even had people like at that program and others telling me like, no, go to, go to California, go to this school, go to that school. I was like, but I want to go to New York. I was sort of less concerned with the school itself. New York just seemed like the right place to go, because I wanted to work in film, but I didn't necessarily want to work on big, like it wasn't like the Hollywood dream. And it wasn't like, oh, I want to work on big movies and make big Hollywood blockbuster or anything like that. I really was mostly interested in filmmakers that were trying new things and pushing the boundaries, and really, again, those are the films that like sat with me for days,
Mm.
interested in finding those people. And I felt like that was New York. Like I was going to find those people in New York, whether it was experimental cinema or, independent film, or not, or other, like something else entirely. I didn't really know exactly where I wanted to go. It was just more I wanted to be a part of storytelling um, and that scene in New York. So that was sort of the motivator to go to school there.
Now, did you have like, was cinematography initially like the first idea as far as, your approach into film?
No, even pre college stuff, I don't think I fully understood it. Um, I still understood filmmaking from a writing and editing perspective. Like I, I understood some elements of lighting and camera work, but I didn't I didn't understand it enough to really like know that that's what I wanted to do as far as the storytelling part. So editing was what I thought, going into college, what I wanted to pursue.
Mm.
Um, but it didn't take very long, like before, because I had to pick a concentration in college. Before I even did that, I was like, oh, I love editing. I love everything about that process. But as far as the filmmaking, like as far as the collaborative process, and what I realized, that I really enjoyed about being on set and working with a lot of people, that editing wasn't really going to allow for that.
Mm.
And in just my personality, just sort of being alone a lot, and sort of it just from like a mental health perspective, I was like, I don't think this is the right avenue but also just realizing like another part of it that I was really drawn to was that on set um, collaboration that I was so drawn to. Um, so that just sort of turned into wanting to crew and learn as much as I could. Um, and cinematography was a more natural progression, I would say. Like I concentrated cinematography in school, but I still wasn't really, I didn't know where I was going to go after that. It was sort of like, this is a time to experiment, time to like um, learn and understand it. But it was definitely a really slow progression to get there. I crewed for a while before pursuing it as a career.
Now, was there ever any sort of tie, um, in, as far as photography, like earlier on in life? I just feel like, and maybe I could be wrong. You can completely tell me I'm a dummy here, but with cinematography, is so many times it seems like where it's you're planning out the shots and you're planning out how visually something is going to move or how the camera is going to enter the room. Did you ever have anything as far as photography with like, just having an eye for shit and just seeing like, yep, this is how this should be seen?
Um, yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, it's one of those things that I didn't think about. Like, yeah, I have a way I see things and a perspective, and an instinct, I guess, of how I want to approach something, what I consider something worth taking a photograph of, or a moment, or something, like it's really a feeling. Um, it's not, I don't, with photography, it was never really like a goal of going out and creating a series of something and telling a story that way. It was more, photography was a little bit more organic. And if I had a camera with me and I'm walking around somewhere, or there'd just be moments that I'd feel compelled to take, a photograph of someone or something. But um, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, yeah,
yeah.
totally. I've always wondered, and like I say, I'm so interested in all the different angles, and especially with having the opportunity being able to do these interviews, it's so cool to be able to hear, different ways of how many different hands there are in, a film or a short or music video or any of this stuff, and I just think that it's really cool as far as, different people's approaches. And I didn't know if it was something just because so many times you have different interviews I read or I see or listen to, and it's just like, oh well, I had this idea of how it was supposed to be shot, and I was speaking with the director and kind of going back and forth,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's
Oh yeah. I
so
mean,
cool.
from cinematography, I mean, to go back to the collaboration, it I love the process of reading a script. And you if I don't know the director or anything about the story and I just read a script, I have an interpretation of it. And then that interpretation evolves when I talk to the writer director, or director. Then it evolves from, so I have my perspective on what I've just read. And when I read something, I visualize it immediately, and it takes me a long time to read because I just can't help but do that. I
Yeah.
try not to. I try just to read it, but it's impossible. So I visualize the whole thing. I don't think of it. I don't visualize it in like very specific shots, but I do visualize sort of what I think the feeling of it is. Um, and then I have a conversation with the director, and this might be either a script with somebody that I'm already going to be collaborating with, or it could be I'm interviewing to work with maybe work with them. But either way, I think that initial conversation is then my interpretation of it I get information from the director, and then that informs some things. But then my interpretation informs some things to the director. So then there's like another layer of developing what what it's going to look like, even just from that first conversation. Um,
Hmm.
and then it just continues to evolve. And what I love is, you can design, like, I love talking about it enough that you can really know a visual arc, um, whether it's just, just goes one way, or or it actually arcs, like, um, you, there's a bunch of different ways to approach it, but you kind of figure out, like, where you're going to start and where you're going to end. Everyone's different. You could talk about the ending and work backwards. You could, you start in the middle. You could do whatever, um, and you can sort of have a blueprint, and a something that makes sense, and that can inform the lenses, that can inform the camera that you choose, that can inform the format, inform a lot of things. And then when you have all of that, then I think there's a lot of room when you get to set and you see performances, and sometimes you have time to watch rehearsals. Some directors and some actors don't like to do a lot of rehearsals, so it's always different in how you see the actual scene unfold in front of you sometimes. And a lot of the time, there's a lot of scenes that you just see for the very first time on the day. And and that's my favorite part, because you can have all of these sort of plans. You can have a rough shot list of how you think the scene's going to go, but if you're really open and you're really thinking about it from a sort of organic storytelling perspective, or at least this is what I love. I mean, it is obviously so many different ways to go about it, and there can be just sort of like, this is what we're going to do, and that's what we're going to do. But I love the process of, then you rehearse the scene, you see it in the space, you see everything together, and then that's the next evolution, and it changes again, and you discover something completely new. And then it continues on later in editing, and then that's a whole other part that, I try to be conscious of it as much as possible, so that I understand, like, what might change and evolve in the editing. But ultimately, my journey sort of ends in that room,
Hmm.
and I do my best to capture the right thing, so that it doesn't have to change later, but it's always going to continue to evolve.
Sure. I mean, at what point do you find a lot of times, even on a first initial read through of a script, that you're taking notes? And you kind of mentioned with lenses, and uh, you mentioned a few different things that I'm just like, I would want to dig into, but I
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah.
end up having
And
your
the
whole
first
damn.
read, like I said, I already wish that I could shut my visual, like, I wish I could just read it,
Mhm.
because I
But
feel
being
like I
your
get a
process,
little
I mean,
too,
that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Because I feel like I'm a little too, like, I wish I could be step back a little bit more when I first read it, to just get the story. But it's hard for me to do that. So if I'm gonna do that, I probably have to read the script a couple of times.
Hmm.
Um, so I really sort of, like, yeah, I sort of skip a step the first time I read it in a weird way, and have to read it again to do that. Um, but the lenses, but the first read through, I'm not thinking about lenses or anything like that. It's more like, sometimes, um, I have a film that's in festivals right now, that we shot part of the movie on film. We shot part of it on 16, and that was when I first started reading it, that's all I could see. Like, that was really easy to just see it in that lens, or in that format rather.
Mm.
And that was one of the first things that me and the director talked about, was just that feeling. Like, it was a feeling that, I couldn't help but visualize, and then, that informs so many visual choices down the road. um
Mm.
and then other times it's not that as easy or simple. Like, sometimes I don't even really see that at all, and it takes a conversation with the director, and then and their like perspective on it is like totally completely different than I was thinking. But most of the time, the projects that I end up, that end up working in, we want to collaborate with each other. Usually we're thinking the same thing. Usually it's like I
Okay.
have a reference, a couple photo references or whatever that I'll put together. Not necessarily a lookbook, but just sometimes it's just like a couple stills for on the initial a conversation, just to be like, these were a couple things that I just immediately popped into my head. And usually that's a good indicator that, this is going to be a good collaboration, if it's spot on or it's really close, if we're already thinking the same things.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome, and it's cool just to hear, just the different aspects to these things and earlier conversations, and all of the molds that can kind of go into these things too, and from the initial evolution of something and how it may change a little bit here and a little bit there, and I could also see that maybe even being frustrating at sometimes, when maybe have an idea or something that you're kind of dead set on and ends up getting changed or kind of deflected a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's only frustrating when it happens because of the wrong things. I
Sure.
think the only
Okay.
time that I really get frustrated about changes like that are when it's because of logistics. It's because
Mm.
of the schedule. It's because of things that have nothing to do with the film itself. That's the
Sure.
only time I get frustrated. I try to stay very open about the creative process. You can get stuck on an idea, and I think that can be dangerous sometimes when
Mm.
you come up with this great, and I'll come back to this with Soft and Quiet, but you get stuck on an idea, and then it turns into it turns into executing this thing. And the sooner that you can recognize it's not going to work, the better.
Oh,
Like,
right.
if it's really worth it, if it's really worth doing, and it's um, the right thing, and everyone's on the same page about that, sure, it's like worth, taking the time to make it work. But if I myself am just like the only, I don't even think I'd ever put myself in a position where I was the only one who was like, no, no, like, we have to do it
Adamant
this
about it.
way. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very open to everyone around me as to whether or not something like that is still worth pursuing.
Sure. Okay. I mean, and transitioning into that. I mean, as far as well, not most recently, because it sounds like you have a movie in the circuits right now. What movie is that?
It's called Fairyland. Shot
Oh
in San
shit.
Francisco, Bay Area.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. And is this just getting into the circuit, or has this been kind of moving around?
It premiered at Sundance, and it's been going to a couple different festivals since then. So
Awesome.
it's
Very
still,
cool.
yeah,
Still new. That's awesome, man.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So, going back as far as within Soft and Quiet, even if you wanted to touch on, this initial moment as far as something that maybe you were a little bit attached to and you kind of had to, step back from, and then,
No, yeah,
move further in.
yeah. I mean, it relates to Something Quiet only in the sense that, the first moment. So I knew Beth from um, the Sundance Labs a few years prior.
Mhm.
So we'd known each other, and we'd done the labs as I was one of four cinematographers that came in, and Beth was a fellow at the labs, and we were paired together, and and worked on a script that she was developing. And at the labs, you work on a few different scenes. Um, and you can sort of use it however you want. You can workshop a scene. And you can experiment on just different ways of how you want to approach filming it. You can just, you know, talk about it. You can do really whatever you want in these labs, and it's really cool. It's a great way to discover your script. It's a great way to just understand, like, some of the fellows at the labs are writers who have never directed anything, so it's just a great way of just understanding the whole process and collaboration, and ultimately just having a chance to develop very key scenes in your script. So
Now, is
we were
I don't
paired.
want to
Yeah,
interrupt, but just as far as within the labs, is that something like, is it like a group, or is it like how what is that?
yeah. It's so there's 10 fellows that participate in it, who are chosen to be a part of it. So it's 10 different projects. And that's where so they bring in 4 cinematographers and different 4 editors, and they pair them with like um,
Oh,
2 fellows, and then it's over a month, so it's a lot. It's a
oh,
lot of
wow.
people. There's
Okay.
mentors who come. Um, it's There's a lot of collaborations. It's just really just like deep diving concentration in filmmaking.
Oh, wow.
And it's
Okay.
really targeted in developing the script itself. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
oh, okay. I don't want to interrupt. I'm sorry. I'd never heard of
No,
that
no, no.
before, and I was like,
It's
I don't know what that
really
is.
amazing. Yeah, it's really cool, and everyone's, for the most part, a volunteer, and it's everyone's just doing it for the love of filmmaking. Like, that's really what it's about, and that's what makes it so great, because it's not a job. It's nothing. Nothing about it has anything to do with making money. Like, it's about the purity of filmmaking and the love for independent filmmaking, and sort of just like stripping away, like, why, like, for me it's like, yeah, this is exactly why I wanted. That's exactly what drew me to it in the first place. So it
Okay.
for me, it was like a beautiful thing in its entirety. um
It's awesome.
uh, so that's where we met.
Okay.
and and we so I already knew her. So when she sent me the script, I um she had done a short film that was in one take that I'd seen at the lab. So it I sort of knew exactly when I first read it. It was very clear, and it was sort of, it wasn't said it would be a wonder, but it was sort of like, this is going to take place in real time. So we were already thinking, we were already like right there. Um, so the first time we spoke about it, it was like very easy to just sort of start going right into how we were going to shoot this. And um, but yeah, sorry, I lost sort of where I was going with
No, no,
oh,
that's okay.
so that being said, um uh knowing that we were going to shoot it as a oneer, we didn't, it was important that it wasn't about the achievement of shooting a oneer. So we
Oh,
didn't want
okay.
to put the pressure on that fact that it had to be a oneer. We wanted the importance of it being shot as a oneer was it being shot in real time. That was the important thing. Um, and everything playing out in real time. So however we could construct that, that was what was important, because that was what was important in the storytelling. Um, but the pressure of this having to be a true oneer was something that we wanted to do it as a true oneer. And we designed it in order to be able to do that. But we weren't going to put the pressure on it having to be one, because
Having to be. Okay.
that was that would have been the detriment. I think, that was detrimental to achieving the story, if we were going to do that, because then it just became about that and not about why we were actually making the film in the first place. So that's just sort of how it relates, because you could have, there could have been an approach where it was like, no, it's about the winner, and then you lose a lot of storytelling potentially, especially
Mm.
in the time frame that we had to shoot it. That could have been detrimental to the film if that was sort of the mindset going in. But
Oh, sure. Now, I mean, you mentioned as far as like you guys initially having the conversation of how to shoot it and what, may have been a couple of the obstacles at first, just from, early on that you were thinking about, as far as shooting it in this style and maybe certain sequences in the film where you're like, how the hell are we going to pull
yeah,
this off, within, structuring?
yeah. Uh, the challenge, the biggest, the logistical challenges, which it it's uh, it's hard, and then it's like, oh yeah, these things make it even harder. Doing the cars. Uh,
Oh,
so
yeah.
so we have three different three different car scenes that happen in the day, at sunset, and at night. Um, Figuring out how to light, figuring out the choreography of that, and then figuring out how to light that. All of those things were challenges that were, we knew they were challenges going in, but then the reality of it was like even more like beyond the like getting in and out of the car and then lighting it. There was the choreography of the follow vehicle or the lead vehicle, going up to the house. There's only one road that goes up to the house, so there was a timing thing where cars had to get down that were prepping the house, um, because certain things had to be prepped last minute, um, like sound had to get there, stuff like that, and they had to get up there and out before we got there. And their only chance to do that was really to just get ahead of us when we were in the parking lot before we took off, to go to the grocery store, right?
Oh, okay.
So like they didn't have a lot of time. So there's like timing things that were happening behind the scenes that made all of that just that much harder, on top of that actual physicality of filming it. And the focus puller, we shot on large format, for a couple reasons, but that just the focus was very, very critical. And the movie starts, um, sort of, it plays into the narrative, but it's one lens obviously, and we go from late afternoon to night. So we found like a stop in the lens where we could progress, the depth of field throughout the film. So as we get into tonight, we're on a lens that it's really, really shallow at that point. So um I had a remote focus. I wasn't doing the focus myself because it just would have been too messy. Like there was a certain sort of like balance of control of what we wanted to control and what we wanted to happen naturally. So as much as we could control on sort of the camera end of things, and it allowed for a lot of organic things to happen versus just sort of having no control to a degree.
Okay.
Uh, I only say it that way because Victoria, which is a big reference, like I know that DP pulled his own focus. It's a much smaller camera, but for whatever reasons, they decided to pull their own focus, and it helped certainly to get in and out of cars and certain logistics, but but I just couldn't imagine doing it on this project. So that
Hmm.
being said, so like getting a focus puller into the van with a whole choreography deal of strategically like opening the back of the van so that he could get into the trunk, and then someone, very helpful to have like remote buttons in the front to like close the back, so you didn't one of the actors hit that button uh in a way that I was filming somebody else when they did that, so you really didn't notice any of that stuff. If you really look
Okay.
for it, you can sort of notice some of that, but we tried to focus on somebody else while something like that was happening, so it didn't feel like all of the choreography was around that kind of structure.
Huh. Man,
But
it's
yeah,
insane.
yeah, those are the things that were just challenge, like, and then the boat at the end was just like this whole, like, it was already, when we were prepping remotely, we knew it was going to be challenging, but then when we got there, there was all the changing tide every day. There were just things that we knew but didn't really think about. And then when we went to figure, like when we actually finally figured out how to do it, then the tide was not in the right spot when we needed it
Mm,
to be. So that was sort of a thing that we had to let go of in terms of the wonder of it all, because
mm,
it there was, you know, we were able to achieve getting out, but not every day because the tide was not where we needed it to be. So that was one thing. But
God.
yeah, there's a lot of things like that.
I mean,
Every single
and
scene has something that I'm like, the choreography, like the church scene was like 18 to 20 different beats of choreography
oh
alone.
my
There's
God.
like 200 beats of choreography designed in this movie. Like, it's not, that's what I mean by control. Like, it it wasn't um improv, like every scene was
Mm,
designed to, and especially up until the house, it was very designed. And then the house, there were just the points that we had to hit were spread out more, so there were in between moments that were a little bit more improvised, so that felt like there was less control. um but
mm,
there were still moments that we had to hit in between that, so there's so the ultimate goal was that it felt like a progression of losing control, and it felt like a progression of chaos without going full chaos and full mess, but not but really the goal was for it to not feel designed at all. um
sure. Okay.
Beyond like the church, which I feel like we wanted that to feel designed. We wanted it to feel very thoughtful, and like you feel the presence of it, you feel the design of it on purpose, so that you sort of understand the very, very beginning is probably the most designed, and it's sort of like this is the language, this is how we're going to tell the story. Like, we go off her to this little kid to the janitor. It's like that's all, like, so that the audience immediately understands, like, this is the language. And then the church is sort of an extension of that, of introducing all of the characters in a very specific way. And then the hope is that at a certain point somewhere in the grocery store, you stop thinking about that, and you're just in
Mm.
the story, and it just becomes about this escalation. um, so that was at least the intention.
I, I think it landed. I mean, now, like something even earlier on that you had mentioned, were there like teams as far as like the grips and lighting between maybe even like certain settings? Because you'd mentioned just as far as like these people being in place at the house before you guys had gotten there.
Yeah.
Did you have, or was this just one soul that was moving from place to place in the process of you guys being kind of in transit, so to speak?
um so there was so the night at the dock, we had to light, um and that was something thing. So once we got to the house, there were a couple battery powered lights that had to be turned on sort of last minute at the house. But beyond that, everything was preset. Um,
Oh,
Same with
okay.
the church. The church was preset. And the first day of filming, we sort of dialed in our exposure levels. Our prep was really fast, and it was all about this, about rehearsing performance. And we didn't do a dry run with I mean, we really couldn't, because the only way to do it was to do it on the first day, because we decided to lock ourselves into this uh, afternoon to twilight night look.
You
So
guys didn't do a dry run?
no, I mean, there was no point in doing it that way, because, like,
Oh,
why not
yeah,
just
true.
do why not just
Fuck
do it?
it and go
Because,
for it.
yeah, because it was just
Yeah.
like, it was a timing thing. It's not like we could do it half
Yeah,
speed.
sure,
Like, we had
sure,
to do
sure.
full, there's no dress rehearsal. I mean, it was like a dress rehearsal, I guess. Like, it had to be all the right timings, because that and that just informed, like, yeah, our first day, the light in the van was too bright. We anticipated, because we couldn't
Mm,
really change it. We had to find a level that just you were like less aware of it in the first van, and then it progressed, because it was too risky to I forget exactly why. I mean, our crew was so small. That was the other thing, but it was just like too risky to like turn it on later. So we just had it on. Like, I think we maybe had like one thing that we had to plug in for the van, but that was like we just eliminated as many variables as we could. But the first day it was really scary, because the levels were all sort of just preset, sort of guesstimating
mm.
where they needed to be. And it, for the most part, it was fine, but there were little things here and there, and we just adjusted that. And then the next day, everything was much closer, but it was definitely more rough than, we didn't have the time to dial everything in perfectly, and we didn't have the resources to like have everything on DMX and adjust things on the fly. We couldn't rely on any of that, because it just was too risky, and we didn't have a big enough crew or time to like choreograph that part of it. So that was more the plan. It was just preset, most of it. And then the night stuff, they when we were at the house, they lit that, and that was a logistical thing. It would have been better to have everything there um, all the time, but we had to wrap it out, because it was a location that we had to wrap out. So
Oh,
we had
okay.
to like reset it every day. But yeah, there's a lot of leapfrogging like that.
Man, oh man.
Yeah, I
It's
mean, timing, like, uh, yeah, timing the actors to come in, the grocery store, and all of that stuff. It was um, that was all, it had to be done remotely, and but we stayed on schedule pretty to the T, which was all credit to the actors, because they were controlling the pace. So
hmm,
if
man,
we got to the grocery store too late, if any one of those scenes is critically, the church, which would have been the easiest scene, because it's the most actors, and the easiest scene, I think, to sort of fluctuate the pace, that if we had gotten out of that scene too late, it would have messed up the entirety of the rest of the film. And I give so much credit to them for keeping it right on schedule, because it's just, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing that they were able to do that.
yeah.
Uh, and they did it the same every day. Like, it's it's really impressive.
The flow of their work. I cannot tell you the amount of, even from when I interviewed Stephanie and Melissa, I had a couple of people message me or comment on the video, and they're like, "These people are actors," and I'm like, "Look, look, look. don't put that on them. Okay, this is a movie, and but just the flow. I think of what they're kind of touching on is the flow of things, and you kind of even mentioning with like the choreography. It doesn't feel like that. I mean, it's very fluid in the motion of just people getting together and having this expression and slowly diving into just this dark subject matter that you're like, man, I had no idea what the fuck I was getting myself
Yeah.
into. And now you're just like, now I'm submerged. Like, where is this going to go? So, but you touching on like the choreography and different things. Um, how do you block something like this? You have an hour and a half. You have something to where you're going to be shooting in a continued succession. Where does that start? Are you just starting from the first moment and kind of going on how the blocking is going to go? You mentioned like 200 some pieces of choreography.
Yeah, I mean, I
Uh,
credit so much of that to Beth and her amazing brain because I had to remember all of, I mean, me and the actors and the boom operator who doesn't get talked about enough, who had to do so much choreography. We're about the same height, um, and build, and she was like literally my shadow. Like I was so impressed with her ability to. I never knew. I always knew when she was there, but I never knew that she was there. It was like really
mm,
impressive.
it's a huge
Um,
compliment.
yeah, we ran into each other once, and it was not her fault. It was a it was there were people outside one of the windows in the house because something was happening. Um, I think like maybe the keys to the van. Something happened that they were dealing with outside, and they had to be right in a sight line during a moment where the choreography was to pan past the window, and I could see them out of my peripheral, so I knew I couldn't go left. And it was a pretty quick move, so I went right and slammed right into her.
Oh
That was
man.
the only time we ever collided. It was the only time anything like that ever happened. And it didn't change anything. Like I ran into her, she moves, and we kept on going. And then I didn't know that she was there. And in that small space, like you think about it, like there was a one of the takes that we did. Uh, Something happened with the props with the food, and we had different props than we were supposed to have, and it was quick thinking on the actor's part to use this prop beyond in instead of the other prop, but it resulted in a bunch of peanut M&Ms, which they're the round ones, they're not the flat ones. Even if they were the flatter ones, it still would have been a little sketchy, but on all over the floor. So
Oh no.
we're trying to do the same choreography with all these like marbles on the floor, basically.
Oh
Um,
no.
so like kicking them and trying not to slip on them, and that day there, I think that was day two. A lot of things went wrong that day, but that was just another thing that happened. Where it's just like I'm like trying to like we're both just trying not to fall over. Um, but as these things just get scattered more and more on the floor, and you're like, oh my god. Um, but to go back to the design, I mean, so much of it was Beth coming up with the choreography. I mean, we came up, we finessed it together, all of us, but so much of it was in our head, and so much had been thought through. I mean, she went to the location uh, months before we were there and timed it out to make sure that where we were filming was going to work. Like it was, and you
Oh
could,
my
and it
God,
was in the
really?
script. It was in the script. Like I knew from when I read it that she had done all that work because it was very specific.
Oh
So she had
man.
already timed it out. um,
Oh.
and then, and then when we got there, we did the route and retimed it, and then we so we broke it up in, the school was one scene, church was second scene, the parking lot and car, first car, we called a transition scene. The grocery store was the third scene. Then we had another transition scene in the car. Then the house was the fourth scene, another transition in the car, and then the dock was the fifth scene. So that's how it was
Hmm.
broken up. So our
Okay.
rehearsals were going to each location and timing, and again, that was, she took that on as well in terms of the timing and figuring out like how long the the church scene had to be in order for us to get to, you know, one, to keep it within, you know, a reasonable amount of time for the film, but also to like get to certain locations at the right time. But and then yeah, each location we just rehearsed over and over and over again until we got it, and then we didn't do it all. The first time we did it all together was the first day.
Man, oh man, that's insane. I mean, as far as your equipment going into this and the smoothness, there's very much still that feel of the point of view and being, next to this person and experiencing this, being in the room, but then also from a technical aspect, you have to look back and it's like, how the fuck is everything so smooth still? From it, being a handheld
Mm-hmm.
versus it being on a track. Did you have anything as far as that was different in this experience from prior work on film?
We stripped the camera down as much as we could. So I had a few people designed. My husband, who is also the focus puller, designed mostly designed this rig. But it was there's a lot of versions of this that exist, that are like these plates that have like designated areas to like put a battery on, to put a Teradek on, put your focus um, uh, system on, and they're very rigid. They're great for most other things, but for this, I needed something that had flexibility
Hmm.
because of getting in and out of the cars. And like the last car scene, I was like
Oh yeah.
sandwiched between the two front seats, and there's no space. Um, so he designed a similar thing, but the plates were connected by fabric so that I could bend. I could bend in any configuration.
Okay.
And I had three batteries, because we were shooting with the LF, which takes bigger batteries. Um, and there were so many different cameras we could have gone with. I mean, we explored the Komodo, we explored other cameras that have better, smaller batteries and only take one battery, but it was just, there were so many between just Alexa itself and its quality and the sensor um, and reliability. There were just so many reasons why we just kept coming back to the Alexa, even though it was a little bit bigger and it took more batteries.
Hmm.
It's just like we figured it out. We could shoot on one card. It filled up the entire card. We tested to make sure that we could shoot 2 hours worth of high resolution footage on one giant terabyte card, and it
Hmm.
wouldn't corrupt. It would keep rolling. Like we tested all of that. It just seemed to be the best camera for the job. Um, but it required having more batteries, so we just distributed like three batteries on my back and then the wireless video and the wireless focus, and that was it. Like one cable that went to the camera, and all the camera was just hand grips, a lens, and a very lightweight matte box. That was all that was on the camera. Um,
Jeez.
and,
That
and
rig
yeah,
was something that was mentioned before. Hearing about, I think
yeah,
Stephanie had mentioned that, and I was just like, oh, like
yeah,
what is going on there? just
yeah.
just the fact of being out of the way, and you kind of mentioning, with your partner there, and them being kind of a shadow to you. They had credited you and your work just as far as like knowing that they're there somewhere, but they're never in the way, tripping over anything. And I really credit that, and especially, I mean, watching it, the couple of times I have ever since, I'm just like, man, it's pretty insane. I mean, like pulling off, some stuff like this, and yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's
it was
awesome hearing behind the scenes too.
yeah, it was something that, I always wanted to try to do. Um, and coming up with how to pull it off. That was all really fun. Like
Hmm.
I took it really seriously. Like when we first started talking about the film, I you know, started working out and doing cardio and all these different things, and just making sure I was really flexible, that I could hold. Because so there's a moment in the film towards the end where the camera goes up and they're on the floor um,
Oh yeah.
in the house, and
Hmm.
it was one of we talked about that scene really early on, and Beth had that shot in her head very early on, so we talked about that moment. So I all of my preparation was basically to get to that moment and be able to sustain. What I didn't want to happen was that when I got to that moment, I was so exhausted that I was just at the mercy of my own exhaustion.
Sure.
Like, oh, my arms are dead now. Like, I can't control like the shake. I can't. And what I wanted was to be able to get to that moment and deadlock and be able to hold it and then get out of it. Um, so like a lot of it was just, building up, being able to hold my arms in a certain position for a while to get to that. Um, so there's a lot of that, like, you know, preparing and testing. I did but when I picked the camera and we picked the lens, um, we tested the card, we tested the batteries, and then I just walked around my property for 2 hours just to see
Oh my
if I
God.
could do it. Because I had to know I could do it before committing to any of it. I didn't want to come out there and be like, yeah, I can do this, and then not be able to. Like I had to know. Um, so I was like, if I can walk around for 2 hours, it's boring as hell. I'm not filming anything really, and trying to like I would pause for like 5 minutes and just hold in a position. I was like, I can do this if I can do that because that was very boring and you know I held positions way longer than I had to on the actual film.
And I would imagine too, I mean, as far as being in the moment and actually, being on set, you have kind of like that adrenaline going from key moments. Or like you said, kind of in the house, and when some of the certain aspects are happening. And I think, something too, it's always hard seeing assaults like what I don't really, like for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's just up on Netflix. I don't really want to like, spoil things, but I think it was tasteful just as far as like it not being hyper focused on actually showing everything
Yeah.
that's happening, and there being like the little bit of imagination, but having an understanding of just being disgusted and being like overly just over these characters. And I mean, was that a thing with Beth as far as mentioning between the two of you within conversation of how those scenes in particular were going to be depicted?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was all very intentional. I mean, and in that scene, those are sort of the beats, I like the moments that I'm talking about, because there's a lot of in between that had to sort of be more organic and follow the action. Like when they're first in the chairs and and the escalation really builds, like that was sort of a little bit like, we talked about how tight we'd want to get, but there were like certain moments that um like with the phone, like making sure that we got around to get that moment. But
Mhm.
then beyond that, it was very intentional about how much we were going to show and not, and
Sure.
how much we were going to see and not see.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
choreography with all of that to like show the like the bag and that stuff like that, that's one of that's one of those pieces of choreography that you maybe think about or don't think about, but like they we had to see them go into it, but obviously they weren't in it, so we had to do like a switch that goes unnoticed because we go into that screaming argument. So that whole screaming argument and her, that calm, that that silent moment at the window, like,
Mm-hmm.
and in the beginning of the cleaning, like all of that, during all of that, the bag's getting switched over. So there's a lot of little things happening like that. The dog was not in the room during all of that. The dog was taken out, so someone had to come in and take the dog out while it was upstairs, so
Okay.
that we didn't traumatize the sweetest little Batman dog. Who, so if anyone was wondering, we did not. His best dog.
No dogs were
It was
traumatized during
not
the making of this.
traumatized. He was taken out of that space, and someone was cuddling him and making him very happy during all of that. And then someone came in during at some point. I don't even remember at this point when that happened, and brought him back in for that final moment.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now, this, kind of comes into just like smaller details, but something that comes to mind. Was there actually a dialogue as far as earlier, the first moments in the movie when the little boy is reading Kim's book?
Mm.
Was there like an actual book printed out that Beth or somebody else had made to where he was actually reading? Because the cart starts going over and you can't quite hear what it is that he's reading out. He's reading the book. Was there actually like a book that was made?
There is yeah, and I think there, when in the church you can kind of see it. I think you can't see the details as much, but there's actually pages and drawings and um but yeah, there was something that was made, but yeah, it's not
Hmm.
featured as much as,
Weird.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, yet again, kind of like a fun aspect. Just it's like one of those things where it's like the cart starts rolling over, and it's like, okay, now I'm interested in what the hell this lady has to say because it can't be good.
Yeah.
And with their plans of having a school and different details that end up unraveling later on, you're just like, oh boy, I can only imagine what book she's reading. But and thank God for all of them. Like as far as anybody I've personally been able to speak to, Stephanie being so sweet, but Jesus, in this
Hmm.
role, she is very grimacing, and it can be hard to watch for sure. But
Yeah.
just hearing the backstory of the where Beth got the inspiration, and and telling stories like this, and for people to kind of take a step back and think about their actions as opposed to just them just being words.
Hmm.
It's huge. I mean, it's definitely something worth telling. And thank you so much for all of
Yeah.
the behind the scenes and all of the fun information on this. This has been absolutely great. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
no, it's I always love talking about it. It's yeah, it's just one of those films. It's really easy to talk about the making of it because there's just so much that went into it,
Not going
and it goes back
on.
to the collaboration part,
Mm-hmm.
which is the fun. Back to what we were talking about earlier. It's just like that's what it's all about, and this is a perfect example of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and one last thing. Did you get to keep anything from the shoot, or was there anything that walking away you're like, man, I wish I would have taken this off to the side and kept. It's
Uh,
kind of a hard project to maybe want to keep something from.
yeah, no, I didn't keep anything except for the rig. I still have the rig.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Yeah, because it was custom built for me,
Yeah.
so it's mine.
Future endeavors.
Yeah,
Yeah, sick. Love it. Love it. Oh, this has been so great. I really do appreciate it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
look
This was
forward
fun.
to the new movie coming out here, and diving further into your stuff from the past. You've been very active in film, so this has been great, man. Thank you so much, Greta. This has
Yeah,
been
no, thank
awesome.
you. Yeah, this was really fun.
Anybody who's tuned in, I'll have it within the next month or so up on YouTube and have it promoting. And yeah, this has been
Cool.
so cool. So thank you so much once again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care. Have a
You
good
too.
one.
Bye.
It's so lo-fi, lo-fi, a whole guy, yeah. Lo-fi horror guy has been recorded in front of a live studio audience.